Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by a very special guest, longtime friend of the firm, frequent co-investor, Steve Jang of Kindred. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Erik. Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, you are a longtime entrepreneur and investor. When you look back at the arc of your career, what do you think is the thread that ties your various different experiences together? Because you've been in different sectors, different experiences. How do you sort of make sense of what's the thread you've kept pulling, or what has drawn your interest?
Good question. I think I've always, even from the very beginning, during school and then in every stage of life after that, the thing that's always been the most fun is the creativity of entrepreneurship. For me, the idea of figuring out a problem to solve that was very personal or painful, or just a key insight into something inside of society or in the economy, and then being really creative about it in the way that oftentimes we don't look at it as creativity in business, but I really think it is. I think creative entrepreneurs find really interesting, sometimes left field, oblique solutions to things, and the kernel of what's exciting to designers and engineers and product managers to come join that mission is because of often the creativity of the founder in solving that problem, not just because the problem is big and fantastic, which it has to be, but the creativity by which you're going to solve that is so important. And that's true of startups in the late 90s. That's true of startups in the 2000s and today.
Yeah. And in speaking to a lot of the founders over the years who you've worked with, one of the things they'll say is that you've been their favorite advisor, their favorite investor. What do you think it is that sort of about you, and don't be modest, that sort of like, what do you understand about company building or about being a sort of consigliere for or counselor for the founder that they really appreciate, that others can learn from?
Well, so I didn't start out my career as a founder. I came out as a designer, front-end developer, then working in product for a while. And so I got to see the inner workings of how challenging and exciting starting a company is, and looking up to founders that I worked for at the time. When you're in that position, you really are getting the unpolished view, and you get the good, bad, and the ugly. And it's really hard, but it's really worth it too when you succeed, because you're not only creating an amazing opportunity for yourselves and your team, but you're also creating great change, hopefully, that's positive in the world. And that goes beyond financial return. And so that struggle to do that is pretty consistent across all startups and companies that are new. And a lot of people will come in and say, well, startups are so glamorous and so exciting, and they only really see the success stories, which is a shame. I think it's important to see everything. And the things that I've learned over the years that help me work with founders, and I'm always improving. I'm always learning about mistakes I'm making in helping a founder. And if I were to list the three things, it would be one, that by working in startups and also starting several companies, I've helped create 3 companies in the past. Empathy is the most important thing, I think, at highest level when trying to support and help founders on their mission. The empathy comes from not only understanding through learning and listening what their challenges are, and every founder and every startup is quite different, whether it's enterprise, consumer, marketplaces, or deep tech. But it's also coming from the idea that you've had some experience in the trenches with them. And then that can come in the form of being a founder or working in an operating company before. And so I do think that helps me understand all the ups and downs in the roller coaster ride that is starting a company that has a limited timeline to accomplish a really, really big goal with, a fair amount of capital, but it's really a deadline. And as much as people don't want to think it is, it's certainly a race, and that's a challenge. The other thing that helps me in working with founders has been get into the details. Getting into the details is a good thing. Oftentimes, founders want to, entrepreneurs want to really show to investors and advisors and even their own team that they really got everything under control. And I will tell you as a former founder, that is not the case. We're doing the best we can with the available information that we have in the small team and set of resources we've been lucky enough to get. Getting into the details as an investor or as an advisor is the best way that you can actually learn about what they actually need help with and to be able to pitch in. And so I think getting into the details, or the weeds, as they say, is super important, and that helps across the board. I think another thing that is really helpful too is to not treat each founder the same way. Each company, each product, each team is very different from each other. Rather than sort of just creating sort of broad, overly simplified rules of how to invest or how to help founders is kind of BS, right? Everyone's very different. And so helping can mean really diving in deep and doing product whiteboarding and really being a good sounding board constantly. And some people don't need that cadence and that depth of detail work. And really what they're looking for is checkpoints to be able to talk about some of their insecurities or their concerns. And that feels much more like just a conversation one-on-one intermittently. So I think those are the ways I think about helping and founders. And that really comes from my experience as being a founder that wanted that type of help.
Yeah. You've been doing this, 2 decades plus. Talk about how the process of company formation and founding companies has changed. Obviously, we have way better technology right now with no code and AWS, of course, that enable company creation to be easier. You guys do a lot of incubation at Kindred. Talk a little bit about how that has sort of affected, how you advise and how you think about company creation.
Well, there's always been sort of a move towards simplification, which, simplification of the tool set that we have to create products or to create companies. I remember during the late 2000s, we had a company called iMeme that we were, it was one pre-Spotify and pre-SoundCloud was the largest on-demand streaming service for digital music. And when we had launched that company, we grew from 0 to 10 million monthly uniques really, really fast. I think it was like 6 months. And it was record-breaking speed at the time. But what happened to us there was that we were we were using a colo service and had our own servers in these data centers. And so it was a constant struggle to keep the service up and running. This is pre-AWS. I remember the subsequent year to year and a half later, AWS launched. And I remember thinking, wow, if this really works, this would have made our lives so much easier. During even a good outcome, right? This is a good outcome where your traffic is exploding. And thinking about tools like AWS, which I think most entrepreneurs today take for granted, is an amazing thing. And so I think that a lot of the technology stack and a lot of the tool set on the end user side inside of a startup, whether you're an engineer, designer, product manager, marketer, or a founder, a lot of that has been simplified and made much more powerful, right? And so if you start from that network and data layer and you go all the way up into applications, and no code, low code is really just the next step in that evolution, starting from the bottom of the stack and moving upward over the last 20 years. And how that's changed things is, look, when you start a company today, you think about what are the APIs off the shelf that I can use to ship a product. You think about what host are you going to use? You think about all the different microservices and SaaS tools internally that you might use. And this is a golden age. I mean, we keep saying that the last period was a golden age, and then the current stage, the current phase of time is again like a heightened golden age. So I think that the nature of technology and progress has been amazing in that, whether it's modular development or it's cloud hosted applications, whether it's microservices and all these available off the shelf, really scalable APIs, we have all of the tool set that we need to ship products within months, within weeks even, which was unheard of before. I remember before you'd see software startups often spend 9 months to 18 months to ship a beta product. And today we've seen startups that, are able to go from idea to an early alpha product within a week or two. So it's really exciting, and it's compacted the timeframes in such a way that it's almost some type of like time acceleration model in terms of startup development.
One thing I want to talk about is Uber a little bit. You were super early at Uber, maybe the first advisor, one of the first people involved. I'm curious, what is an early lesson or insight that you took from that sort of early part of the journey that you think isn't fully understood or appreciated, or there's a misconception about that as you took it to advising companies in the post Uber experience, or just thinking about company formation and scaling?
I think a lot of folks look at really successful startups today and assume that the very beginning was equally polished and equally successful, and the intent and nature of it was always of high quality. And I think one way to put it is everything big does not start out big. Everything big started out small. And in startups, I would say that there's a theme called startups don't start out as really successful companies. They often start out as a side project. And this idea that a side project can become a world-changing company and create a totally new market and solve a vast series of problems for humanity is something that really is the norm and not the exception. So in Uber's case, it was really a side project when Garrett Camp, who was the founder and CEO of StumbleUpon at the time, he was a Canadian citizen, didn't have a driver's license. And back then in San Francisco, the story well, which is taxi cabs were really hard to hail, and you couldn't even call and rely upon them to show up at the right time and place. And so he envisioned this as a side project. And at the time, I had built some iOS and Android apps and used GPS and said, hey, you want to take a look at this? I was an advisor to StumbleUpon at the time, helping them with product. And I was in between startups myself. And I remember the idea was, create an LLC, let's hire some contractors, and let's get a prototype built. And this is really the early days in the first iteration of iOS and Android. And even back then, the way GPSS worked and GPS on our phones, it was pretty wonky still, right? It would be pretty inaccurate for a good chunk of the day. And the first drivers were hired, from a car service company local in San Francisco, and hired them on an hourly basis to just hold the app. And this was the first time that any of them had held even an iPhone. And so that experience was really a series of contractors on the development side, working with the first iteration of iOS, hiring drivers. It wasn't sort of the full Uber model. And immediately among beta testers, it was popular. Like, people were like stunned to be able to see a car on a map and the car icon show up. And then back then, drivers, because they were coming from these limo and car service companies, they were wearing suits with ties. And so it was like a visceral experience that was really shocking. And it was an exciting side project. And I remember when an offer went out to the first full-time engineer, Conrad, and then the first GM CEO, which was Ryan Graves. And they both started about the same time. And they were the first employees of Uber. And it was still really seen as a side project. And the seed raise was, there were several people who I won't name, but declined, right, and passed on it. And I think that it was not an easy fundraise process. And so it was really this. No one was full time. It was a side project. And this is how a lot of startups, most startups that are successful, started out this way. And I think the origin story of a lot of companies is, and I think this is changing, but the origin story for a lot of companies is that it was very, this is really well thought out, well planned from the beginning. And that's just not true. And Uber is an example of that, where it was a side project that no one wanted to work on full time.
Yeah.
Even Travis at the time was an angel investor. And I remember having a chat with him at his house about, do you want to work on Uber full time? And he was sort of vacillating between, look, I've got a great angel investment fund. And I remember him whiteboarding all the companies on the whiteboard, and they were all great. And it wasn't really until the side project started to gain real steam in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And it was right about the time where San Francisco as a city sent a cease and desist. Okay. I think that was a sign to everyone that everyone ought to start thinking about this, working on this full time, and taking it seriously. So, yeah.
It's interesting because in many ways it broke the rules of, the perceived rules people have around, hey, if someone is a founder that has a big equity stake in the company, they should be full-time on it. The founder should be the CEO. And people have been dubious of this model. Some people are pulling it off, of course, but where, there's a CEO who has an idea that they, and then they'll take some big equity chunk and find someone else to run it. And so it's crazy that Uber is the success case in which that worked, tremendously well. I'm curious how you think about that process at all, or extrapolate it out to other companies, but also just what is Garrett's superpower? Like what enabled him to, and of course he's trying to do that again with Expa in different ways.
I think Garrett is in a way, we're talking about how startups often, successful startups and large tech companies often started out as a side project. Like there's the original story about Apple and Hewlett Packard, the garage, right? And that origin myth, which oftentimes is actually real, but that was a function of, no one has garages in San Francisco, right? That was a function of Palo Alto, Cupertino, and San Jose, right? It was these suburban startups, right? And they started in these quote unquote garages. In San Francisco, I feel like they were started in co-working spaces as side projects, right? And that was true of Uber. And Garrett, his particular talent and superpower in being able to start it as a side project and to have it become a successful company long term with the leadership and help of everyone that came after the initial idea, was that Garrett's just a really creative problem solver. And I think creative problem solvers can really put together a complete picture of what should be built. Not just saying, hey, it's X for Y and kind of be done with it with a mock-up, but really think it through and think about what the entire product should look like, what the business model might be, and running the numbers. And so I think that creative problem solving as an entrepreneur is not just being a great designer. It's not just having really, far out there ideas, but it's really painting the whole entire picture and getting people excited to work on it. So the more complete that picture is, the more completely you've painted your vision in both technical architecture, design, operational method, and even the numbers, how you forecast the assumptions and how this should all work. That just creates a lot of positive energy. People want to go work on that. People want to hitch their wagon to that. If you're a great engineer, you want to work on something substantial and well thought out, and it has to be compelling to you. So Garrett is really good at both the creativity and creating that compelling, complete picture of what his vision is. And so I don't think it's everyone that can create a side project that becomes a successful company. Rather, the logical reasoning is that a lot of successful companies come from that side project. And so I don't want to mistakenly say that I know all side projects will become successful, but it's more that this is more often than not the original root of a lot of these very large cases that we hear about in the market.
One, you spent a bunch of time in consumer, building consumer companies, investing in consumer companies, and sometimes you come from the music world. Sometimes I think, Steve, you're too cool to be a VC. In that you have sort of a real sense of taste and aesthetics. How do you sort of think about consumer? What's your sort of framework for evaluating consumer opportunities that you either invest in or decide to build?
Yeah, I mean, look, the idea of taste is, I think, important in almost everything. If you're making products or creating services for other humans, you have to have good taste at whatever it is. Having good taste is not just an aesthetic tool, but it actually comes from being able to look at all of the different variables of the situation and just coming up with the most elegant solution. And so, to me, to define taste is how can you look at an entire picture and really make the best judgment call, whether or not to join this company, whether or not to build this product feature, whether or not to hire this person, or whether or not to invest in this, seed stage startup, right? And all of these things are pretty tied, I think, to how you evaluate the world around you. So when you talk about music, that's definitely an aesthetic emotional reaction. But I think that we have an aesthetic emotional reaction oftentimes to whether or not we believe a founder can take this crazy, awesome vision and actually execute upon it. Do they have what we think are the most important things at Kindred, at least, are the ability to build, whether they're a designer, engineer, or product manager? Do they have the ability to hire a great team, which again is to the idea of being a compelling presenter of your vision and being thorough about that. And then the final part is, are you mission driven? Did you feel the pain that you're trying to solve before? Tell us about that pain. Is it authentic? Is it genuine? And so taste often is just having an emotional reaction to these variables. And a lot of people will say, well, investing should be a cold, calculative, stoic exercise. Sure, we all aspire to do that. But to get excited pre-product, before a product exists, before any customers exist, and it's just maybe one or two people and an idea, it has to be emotional. Emotional investing on top of all of the other stoic, calculative factors is what's important at early stage. At growth stage investing, maybe not as important.
Yeah.
Right? You have numbers, you have a team to review, you have an operational system to evaluate. It's probably less important. But I think when you're angel investing or you're seed investing, the emotion and that taste is super important.
Yeah. And, one thing I think a lot about is trying to have beginner's mind in sectors where I have, preconceived notions about. And one of them, like you, I of course started a music company and had a difficult time. So I've sort of soured on music and haven't gotten excited about anything in the space since. Do you have a similar experience in music, or how do you view the category or just the concept of beginner's mind more broadly?
Sure. So it's interesting. The beginner's mind is a concept that comes from Buddhism, actually, Zen Buddhism or Chan Buddhism, whichever language you're using from Asia. And, the concept is really built around the idea that approach things with no ego, approach things with the ability to learn from scratch and wipe away preconceived notions. And so if you take this out of sort of philosophical and religious bounds and you bring that into startups, which you got to be careful with, right? Not everything applies. The beginner's mind on different areas is that timing is often the thing that is left out of the conversation. Once had an interesting back and forth with an investor that I really admire, Fred Wilson from Union Square, and he talked about the market, the product, and the team. And I agree 100% with those three things being the main evaluation pillars of looking at a startup. But the fourth thing that I offered was that timing is super important. And now there's certain arguments that people say, well, the right team will create the right timing. But for the most part, there's still things that are required of on the demand side of a startup's product or service vision. There's still things that are required on the technology infrastructure or enablement that are just make these things possible. And so, we invest in consumer enterprise, B2B, marketplaces, food innovation, fintech. We're all over the map. We're a generalist. We sort of have ADD about our themes by intention, and we're very generalist. So we look at a lot of things, and the way we kind of evaluate timing or put timing into the evaluation process is not only is this the right team or is this the right market, and is this the right product approach, right? Because often there isn't a product yet. It's just a vision. But we look at the timing. Timing is super important. Uber would not have happened without GPS, iOS and Android, and really a need for local transportation that was constrained and frustrating, right? So all these things came together really in 2009. Again, GPS satellites, iOS, Android, smartphones where you could build great applications that could access all the sensors on the phone, and then also the right sort of sunlight and water of having a really bad taxi cab system out there in most major cities on the planet. So the timing aspect is super important. And now you talk about digital music. We learned so much about how difficult it is to build a digital music service. When iMeme was bought by MySpace, I remember talking to Daniel from Spotify, and we had met briefly. And I also met and was tried to be helpful to the SoundCloud founders, Erik and Alex. And I gave them a couple bits of unsolicited advice, which was, one, try not to do licensing agreements on the terms of what the music labels and publishers would tell you is the normal set of terms, because they don't work. We tried them at iMeme and they did not work. Even with 100 million monthly uniques, it just didn't work mathematically. The other thing that I left them with was you might benefit from a better set of time factors. People are much more likely to not want to buy downloads and CDs, and much more likely to be social, because social software has become the standard of how people want to interact online. And so timing right now is that Spotify really looks like an amazing product. And I don't think that product could have been successful as a product or company 10 years ago. And so to your question of, are you sort of turned off of any particular space or type of product? I think it's all a matter of timing, right? And so a lot of times people talk about being too early or being too late. And so I want to reintroduce the concept of timing as one of the four pillars of evaluating a startup.
I love that, and you do a lot in crypto. And some people think it's too early. Some people think it's just the right time. How do you, when you're evaluating sort of frontier spaces, new spaces, crypto, VR, some other examples, how are you checking as to whether you're too early or now's the right time? Any framework for thinking about that?
Yeah, there's a couple ways that I like to think about it. One is I love going down the rabbit hole with founders. If there's a new space, a new technology area that I'm not as familiar with, I don't look at this. A lot of folks will say, "Hey, this is not in my wheelhouse, so I'm going to opt out." And I think that's actually the most boring thing I can think of as an investor. Over specializing is not, what I'm interested in, not what Connie and I are interested at Kindred. We want to go down the rabbit hole. Uh, what that means is if you meet a founder that's dynamic and visionary and is solving a problem that you agree is important, but you're just not as familiar with, that means that why don't we go down the rabbit hole with them and follow the founder to their market, to their technology area, and try to learn as quickly as possible so that we can get our arms around it, but then also be helpful to them. And that's really exciting. The other aspect of investing in different areas is when you think about a lot of the spaces out there and what it requires to do well as a founder, the particular subject matter is super important, but the founder needs to come with that. The founder comes with a deep understanding of the problem or the market opportunity or the technology space. That's not for you to do for them anyway. As an investor, you are there to support them and you're there to knock down obstacles or even give them a way to not have to recreate the wheel on a lot of things. And so where I think great early stage investors can spend time, and I saw this as a founder, and this is what I got from some investors of mine as a founder and not from others, was, help with the founder stuff. How to hire your first 5 team members, how to think about the next round of financing, how to map out a product roadmap that both instills confidence from your team, but gives yourselves the ability to be responsive to new information as you succeed or fail at each step. How to go to market with your product, whether it's a SaaS tool, a marketplace, or even a root level technology company providing a service or a product to another company that's actually facing the end user. So all of these things are, and we call it the founder stuff, that you can just really roll up your sleeves and help with. And that's super important across any vertical. The final thing on this topic that I think is really important, and it's something that we are thinking about and trying to make a little bit more programmatic in what we do at Kindred, is the idea that how do you see, a technology or an innovation that can affect change 2, 3, 4 degrees up in society? And a lot of what you see in food innovation, for instance, or fintech, is not directly facing the customer. There's a wrapper around it, or it's a embedded component of a product that becomes part of the stack inside of another product, right? And part of the imagination is not just to zoom in really tight and to see the details of it, but sometimes imagination is like zooming back out, right? How do we zoom out to see where does this fit in the big picture of things? And does it create an exciting new version of the world that you want to see? And so that's something we have to do at Kindred because we're investing, so early, but also, in this state of like, there's known unknowns and unknown unknowns for every startup and every founder. We have to be able to zoom out and say, is this company with their particular product or service or technology, are they creating a world ultimately that we want to live in and that we think is exciting? And if you use that, and if you have the imagination to connect the dots all the way through and create a through line to that, almost every company can look exciting, right? And so, then you're faced with the hard part of saying no to so many great and talented founders. But we often think about how do we zoom out and imagine the world that this founder and this team are trying to create.
In sort of the first 6 to 12 months of a founder's journey, what's probably the most common mistake or misconception that you see them have? Of course, every company is different. Every founder is different. But whether it's on product or whether it's just financial planning or some other element, what's sort of something that you wish founders in general more appreciated or better understood?
That's a hard question because I don't think that there's a one right answer. Because again, everyone's different.
Totally.
When I was a founder, I made a series of mistakes at each company that were different than the last one. So I think the ability to keep making new mistakes, not old mistakes, is probably the best. If you're to take on sort of a negative space view of like what you're trying to do, it's not just to build great products and make customers happy and hire the most talented people you can find. Those are all pretty obvious things. I think the less obvious things are the practice of every time you make a mistake, or fail at product or fail with a team member, is to debrief after that and really like understand it. There's an analogy like when you create a product and you ship a release, and the idea that you have some expectations on what you'd like to see from that product release, what you expect your end users to do or your customers to like, or how the metrics might be shaped by this release, and then doing a postmortem afterwards and saying, so what were our actual results? And when you do that, it really informs your product development process, and it helps you improve as a team, as a system. And it's the same way with, I think, starting and running a company, which is you come in with certain expectations or a belief that you're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And then when you can't, oftentimes in the heat of the moment, you just kind of like ignore it, or you move on very quickly and you just try to tackle the next project or the next problem ahead of you. But I think that the thing that was helpful for me, I often would get so focused in on product development as a early founder that I would spend less time on team development, and it felt very zero sum. And then later on, it became more about taking risks on the product roadmap, and that was a new problem that I had encountered for myself. And so I think I got better at looking at putting into the process of reviewing performance or outcomes immediately in that moment, and trying to codify that in some way into my memory that, hey, I goofed on this one. Here's why I goofed. Let me go talk to the people I worked with on this, and let me get their honest, blunt take. And getting that transparency and honesty and candor from them is super important. And I think that there's a way to do that very quickly and efficiently. But I think baking that into your product development process as a team, baking that into your founder process as a leader of your company is really important. And I think that whether you're a first-time founder or you're a third-time founder or whatever, I think that that's something that I think is probably the most universal thing that I would recommend, is to, just like you would in product, you would do a review on expectations versus actuals. I would say that that's a good thing for a founder to do with even their co-founder. I think that's super helpful, and it really is therapeutic or cathartic, especially when it's a failure and not a success that you're doing a postmortem on. And it really, really gives you a clear, distilled way to track your own progress.
We were just talking about crypto, VR. We're talking in near the end of July. A few months after COVID. How are you thinking about sort of the new normal, about investment trends, about your focus right now in terms of spaces or types of companies that you're looking to invest in right now, Steve?
Yeah. I would say that some of the more interesting areas that we've seen in as of late, crypto, AR, in a larger perspective, media entertainment technology, I think is going through a renaissance right now. I think VR was largely a disappointment for a lot of people, but AR has a lot of application into media entertainment. And I think functional food, which hasn't classically been an area for venture capital, and sort of sat outside of biotech, sat outside of technology venture capital, which was largely software or hardware driven. That's a really interesting space. And then I think fitness and wellness has had a huge renaissance boom as well. So that these aren't areas that were classically viewed as Silicon Valley venture capital, right? But as of late, just by sort of bottoms up grassroots excitement from the people in those areas, they've been able to create really exciting new futures in their respective spaces. Like functional food has been an industry for almost half a century, but as of late, the plant-based aspect and the performance-based aspects of functional food has really spurred on a lot of scientific and technology startup development. But just talking about crypto in particular, I think the fundamental idea of community-owned services and software has always been interesting. But I think that crypto, in a weird, oblique way, has become the design and infrastructure to be able to execute that. Community-owned marketplaces or community-owned services. The idea of removing the middleman or the many middleman parties through technology was true, and a lot of the marketplaces that we've seen have done that. But the middleman has been replaced by a more efficient and powerful technology platform, which is great. It creates progress in that it collects that entire marketplace and brings it all online into one service. But I think the next generation of companies are really looking to see how do we create these marketplaces or these services in a way where the community participates in the ownership as much as being part of the service providers within it. And that's really exciting. Crypto allows you to do that. So in a nutshell, it's how do we find and build companies that are essentially using crypto for non-crypto use cases and applying it in the real world. And I think that's really exciting. Yeah. So there's a company we invested in called Brain Trust that's doing that for talent marketplaces, just like, TopTal or any of those talent marketplaces out there for engineering and design services. They're doing that with a token design model where, this is not a crypto for, self-sovereign money or anything like that, but really focused in on how do the engineers and designers actually participate in the value created by the marketplace itself. And that's really exciting. And they're doing that with crypto economic models and a token system. Set Protocol is also doing that for asset management. DYDX is doing that for derivatives exchanges. And derivatives, as you know, are many times over much larger in notional value than the spot markets in any type of asset or commodity. Cross-border microlending is a great area for crypto to be applied. Even what we call kindred cultural economies, like drops, pre-sales, exchanges, all of these things that we see out there in services like StockX and eBay. This is a community that is global. It's a community that is on a daily basis creating as much transactional energy as the NASDAQ or many stock exchanges. And how do you apply, again, crypto technology and design to improve this real world vertical? And so we're seeing a lot of companies like that. There's a few companies we've invested in recently that we'll be able to share publicly, but they're addressing a lot of these areas, and that's super exciting. I think, there's still a lot of, volatility and question as to, outside of Bitcoin and Ethereum, what are the great use cases? And there's a company in our portfolio that you know well, Bitski, that is providing the wallet and payments infrastructure there. And so that, I think that the next 2-3 years, we're going to see an explosion of companies that are operating the virtual worlds, gaming, and all these other areas that we just talked about that are going to apply concepts from crypto, but aren't sort of crypto native, so to speak.
Yeah. Curious to hear more about your idea of what would a community-enabled marketplace look like, or what are some examples of what that is or could be?
Yeah, so I mean, the first marketplaces out there were essentially operated like online stores that were bulletin boards, right? So eBay is a great example of that, right? And Craigslist is a great example, even more bulletin board like than eBay even. in this current iteration of marketplaces, we see companies like Uber and Lyft and Thumbtack and Etsy and Poshmark. Poshmark was and Uber were both prior portfolio companies in the prior Kindred fund. And what they did is great. They collected all of that supply and demand into one cohesive, functional marketplace app or website. Now, would be interesting in the next iteration is to see where the participants, whether they're drivers or whether they're sellers or whether they're creators, to be able to participate more in the value. And that's just a natural evolution of of people being a little bit more well-informed about how these systems work. And like with any capitalist system, we strive to remove the cost and the middleman and the fee taking and the rent seeking. And so in a talent marketplace like Braintrust, that would be where the engineers and designers who are being hired to build products or services for their clients are actually participating in the value that marketplace accrues as the middleman. Now, for instance, in drops, let's say, sneaker drops and, collectibles and things like that, we're investors in a company called Otis. And Otis has created a fractional investment oriented stock exchange for these products. And that's like, a art piece by Yayoi Kusama or by Kehinde Wiley, right? Which was the first Otis drop when they launched. Now, in these cases, investors in this marketplace are able to buy fractional ownership. So they've opened up democratic access in the marketplace of arts and collectibles. Now, in the case of creators who are new in the market and creating limited edition products or want to launch their products, how would they be able to participate in the value? And I think that to make it truly community owned, so that both the people buying drops from new artists or new creators and the creators themselves being able to participate in that value, a token system makes a ton of sense. That token system can not only accrue value through the transactional value that's happening through the system of buying and selling, but it also is collecting fees on behalf of the creator. And so if you're able to tokenize that and represent that value in the form of a token, then you can actually distribute those tokens to both the buyer and the seller in these marketplaces based upon their activity. And that is a really interesting concept, which, classically ownership and equity of a marketplace is reserved for accredited investors and for financial institutions. And it's been divorced from the buyer and seller in these marketplaces historically. So that's a concept that comes from crypto and comes from the community co-op model that we've seen in American history, but never have we been able to pull that together and bring that to play in marketplaces until now. And so I would love to see that for drops, which, StockX, imagine in StockX, if you were able to, as a creator, see some residual value from your products being sold on a secondary market, and you see those prices rise. It's a classic example of the artists, the greatest artists don't see any value in their lifetime from all these like Sotheby's auction sales and things like that, right? And so how do we bring that forward so that all this secondary trading volume benefits the actual creator? And so I would love to see that in the area of drops and pre-sales and things like that. And it's an area that came from inspiration from Kickstarter and the StockX's of the world. And I think it's time now for that to happen for this new generation of creators.
Totally. That would be awesome. And looking forward to it. You mentioned fitness and wellness. I made an investment a few years ago in the fitness space, sort of marketplace for fitness instructors, great team. But I was a little scarred on that space. That company didn't do well. It just seems like a really hard space to really get marketplace liquidity, or and people just seem sort of fickle around fitness. We obviously seen Peloton. Future Fit seems to be doing really well. How do you think about the fitness space, or in terms of where are the opportunities?
I look at fitness, as a subset of well-being. And the interesting thing about timing that we talked about is that, before it was frankly quite hard to get fitness instructors and their clients together on an online platform, because most of the people wanted to go to either these large member club gyms, or they wanted to go to boutique fitness studios. They wanted the in-person social experience, and that was much more rich and high quality for them. But what's happened in 2020 with the pandemic, it's really forced everyone to find ways to get that same fitness experience and that same well-being at home. So, look, fundamentally, I believe that these large member gym clubs are going to go the way of Blockbuster Video. I think it'll take 10 years plus for these large clubs to die down to only a small percentage of how people stay fit. I think that a lot of the movement that Peloton has created has really clued in a lot of people to the idea that they can have a social fitness experience with other people and an instructor, and they can do it from the comfort of their own home. Now, what else has happened is that mobile technology, video streaming has all gotten better, and also connected fitness equipment has gotten better. We're investors in a company called Tonal that is doing strength training through a digital machine that provides resistance as well as video content through a screen, and has a subscription model. And people are, just like Peloton, are finding that this is not only a replacement for the gym, but also an improved experience on many levels. So Peloton and Tonal, these companies have seen 400% growth year over year, not only because they were on track to do that, but really accelerated much more by the at-home existence that we're all sort of faced with in 2020. So once we develop these behaviors, these become habits. And these become habits because they're actually good and it's beneficial and it feels good to do this at home. We might stick with it. And I think that this has just been a catalyst. This time has been a catalyst for a lot of the connected fitness companies. Mirror got bought by Lululemon recently, and that was another example of that. But I think that your old company that you invested in, we've seen a ton of companies enter into that space, and all with a different approach. And I think that timing-wise, this is the right time. I think all of the supporting technologies and a lot of the behaviors, the user behaviors that we want to see are coming to a head right now to make that all very possible.
Going back to frontier stuff for a second, sort of crypto, what do you think is the biggest bottlenecks right now, or sort of the biggest questions that have to be answered in the next few years? It seems that we're sort of in a lull right now.
I think what we're looking at right now is that, so we're investors in Coinbase, and what we've seen is that the first level of building blocks have been put in place, which is there's smart contract platforms. There are decentralized systems across many different use cases, including, TLDs, top level domains, file sharing, storage. So a lot of the primary use cases that make a lot of sense for crypto have been put in place. And what we've seen basically is that some work and some don't. In the case of Namebase, there's been a huge gold mine style rush to capture top level domains. And that's in response to the very centralized ICANN and current TLD system out there. The use cases of crypto so far really have been about investment speculation and, to a certain level, store of value. I think the next generation will be about crypto technology and design, again, used for non-crypto use cases. So pre-existing markets where there is a lot of value, a lot of buyers and sellers, dynamics which pre-exist but are fragmented in nature. And so how can crypto elegantly capture value and then offer a way to not only be an owner in the system as well as a participant? And that includes all the things that we've talked about before, which is, cultural economies. We can talk about top level domains, talent marketplaces, lending. These are all ripe areas primed for innovation by crypto. So I think looking outward from crypto and not looking inward is a good thing right now. I think there's a lot of direct application that will allow certain systems to exist on a protocol level rather than in a centralized sort of corporate like profiteering model. So I think that the younger generation, the new generation out there, is really sensitive to this, and so I think the timing is right for the next decade or so to really explore that. But in the big picture of things, crypto is not that old, and so we're still in a learning process. But I think the fundamental technology behind it and the ethos behind it can be applied in other areas.
Totally. You've also done a number of things in fintech. When you talk about your thesis there, or where you're most excited, or where you see the most opportunity?
Sure. First off, fintech is truly important and amazing. It's a set of features that I think will be part of every company. Fintech reminds me of how we would talk about sort of, cloud hosted applications. Eventually everything will be cloud hosted and it'll be an aspect of every system. And I feel that fintech, more and more what we've seen in a lot of our portfolio companies and in new companies we meet, that fintech is a technology area that is going to affect every company, whether it's B2B, B2C, in almost every aspect. So that being said, it's also an area with the most jargon I've ever seen in the industry. Maybe electrical engineering hardware companies have more acronyms and jargon. But what's really exciting about fintech today is that you've got the benefit towards the individual consumer and family. There's so much to do in that space. We've invested in previous companies in the space. Kanye was an investor in a company called Earnest, working with student loans and debt. We invested in Bloom Credit, which does CRA-style credit analysis. And then today, we've invested in this fund. We've invested in Point, which is offering a new consumer debit card, which has the benefits of all the loyalty and rewards of a high-end credit card and providing it to your debit account. And it's all mobile-based, and it's exciting. You're getting visceral, daily, frequent benefit from your very normal spending, right? Nothing fancy, not for high net worth individuals like many of the other rewards credit cards. And so democratizing the financial system is a really exciting part of fintech. The other part of fintech that we think is really exciting is the idea of removing a lot of the fragmentation and lack of access for businesses. So we think a lot about how businesses can not only borrow money, but how they can make payments and move capital on behalf of their own business interests. So that's been an exciting area. And then a final area, which in fintech that I think is relevant, is where crypto and fintech meet. Again, this is, DeFi has been a term within crypto that has been somewhat of an oasis where there's been a lot of usage, volume, and float happening. But I think that what we're learning there is how to make things not only much more fluid in terms of user experience and seamless, but we're also learning about how to remove a lot of the fee taking and the slowness of financial services today. So the DeFi space is a great area where crypto can be applied to what is less of a crypto native experience, but much more congruent with the existing financial system. So I really like the space where crypto and fintech meet as well.
Totally. And how about the rise of no code? Where does that sort of affect your investments, or how do you sort of think about that as a category or sort of enabling technology?
Yeah, like we mentioned, this golden age that keeps happening, right, increasingly so, has been made possible by all these tools and services, right? The entire stack is getting simplified. We started with application servers and hosting and moved up into all these third-party APIs and microservices. And no code, low code tools like Webflow for app development, Airtable for productivity, Metabase for business intelligence and data analytics, and Northflank for DevOps. Northflank is a company that we recently invested in, which provides a single solution and cloud hosted for DevOps. All of these things open up more opportunity to build quickly and find early product success or failure faster. But what's secondarily important behind that story is that it's just creating more opportunity for more entrepreneurs, more builders, more creators to ship product. That's a wonderful thing. And if you look at the technology industry as a Darwinian industry, having more competitors competing for capital, competing for mind share with users to create new products and solutions in the market is good for humanity. It's good for society. It's good for the economy. And so if this proliferates as on course, I mean, we're seeing job creation. We're seeing a lot of the problems out there in the world can be helped or can be helpful in solving a lot of those problems. Now, technology alone is not the panacea for all of these problems, but it is often a necessary tool. And I think that the no code, low code movement, I mean, it's part of a larger movement. It's really sort of, if you were to really whittle it down to a very basic visual construct, it is a dashboard and design movement. It's how do you take that which is complex and requires a fair amount of training and experience? How do you simplify that behind a dashboard and allow people to visually design software? And that's what no code, low code is. It's visual IDE instead of writing raw code. And that's an amazing thing. What does it do? It creates opportunity in diversity of who can write applications now, who can create websites, apps, products. You don't have to have gone to a 4-year college. You don't even have to have gone to a coding academy. If you have natural language ability and you can articulate what you want to build, you can build a prototype app today. And that's really exciting. You can use Figma, Webflow. You can get hosted on AWS. You can use all of these tools to get a product up and running and shipped. It might not be complex, and the ongoing product that you're gonna have millions of users to scale on, but you're able to get your foot in the door. And I think that's opening, democratizing access to creating products is one of the best things that the software industry can do. And I think that's what's really exciting. William Gibson had a quote from one of his books. He says, "The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed." This is a prime example of what we're seeing in software. Right now we lack the ability to open up access to more creators unless they have the network or the entitled access or the education already to enter into a well-known startup or big tech company or computer science department at a 4-year college. Coding academies help, but really, if you can use just logic and visual tools to create software products, that opens us up to 10x, 100x more people of any income level, of any educational background, anywhere on the planet. That alone makes more of a difference than remote work or distributed work, which I think is great. But the idea of using a visual a design environment to create software opens up so much opportunity. So imagine you can create, you're a small business today, and you can create a online store within 2 weeks using off-the-shelf low-code products versus spending $100,000 on a designer development shop and waiting 6 months. That's an amazing opening of opportunity. What we're essentially talking about with this type of technology, it's so game changing. It's not, there's a lot of excitement over GPT-3 and OpenAI today, and a lot of the demos have been really captivating. But underlying that is an amazing opportunity to open up the economy and entrepreneurship. Imagine small hospitals being able to create HIPAA-compliant messaging apps for doctors and patients. Imagine teachers being able to create curriculum applications for the iPad for kids that can't come to class anymore. These are all things that are gatekept and prevented because of the cost of, highly paid engineers who want to work at big tech companies or cool venture-backed startups and don't want to solve a lot of these smaller, widespread problems that may not have the same economic benefit to them. And so I think that arming and decentralizing the power of creating software is super exciting.
Totally. I'll ask Richard's quick hot take on, do you think that remote is the new default, and that that is going to be more popular than companies, being co-located in the same office, a year from now? Or how do you sort of think about that?
Yeah, I think within technology-oriented companies, remote work is quite easy to pull off, right? Especially if a company is new and they start off remote and distributed, it's quite easy. A lot of our companies in our portfolio were remote and distributed pre-COVID. I think what we're seeing though from the big companies is really fascinating. Everyone from Twitter, Google, and their ilk that are very office-based, teamwork driven within the office are already telling their employees that we're going to move to remote. So I think this is a permanent shift. And the reason why I think it's permanent and not temporary is because the actual net economics of it are going to be better. I think it's going to be better because you can hire talented candidates wherever they might be. You don't have to relocate them or force them to relocate to take this amazing, incredible job with your big company. The commercial real estate costs are going to minimize as a percentage of total budget in the P&L. I think that the idea of offshoring and outsourcing, that distinction will get blurred and kind of go away. I think call centers are already cloud-based and remote. I think that design and development for a lot of companies has been a single minority double-digit percentage of their total work. I think it'll slowly creep up and become perhaps a majority, especially for companies that aren't technology companies per se in Silicon Valley. So I think that this will be permanent. I think because the economics of it will start to make more sense, as well as the talent pool access. I think for those two reasons, that what is being catalyzed and accelerated during COVID is going to stick, and for good reason. Automation, moving everything off premise into the cloud, a distributed workforce is all a movement that was already happening, and it's just accelerated now many times over because of this year. And that's going to have a reverberation on things like education. We're seeing homeschooling already as a big push, but we're seeing remote school pods where it's established schools offering remote schooling with classroom pods, which just emerged as emergent behavior in the last 4 weeks because all the lockdowns continued from a lot of the state governments. So you'll see more last mile fulfillment and logistics focus because people will be working from home, being educated from home. And then what that requires to do all of this is digitize the whole supply chain. It's to digitize all of these functions now that are going to be operating from at home. So I think for a lot of people, it's going to be quite hard to work remote. I think it's going to be quite hard to have childcare remotely at home. It's going to be very difficult. This is not going to be easy. And it's not fair to everyone from a moralist perspective. But what's going to be exciting is that it's a new world where if companies are allowing people to work from home, that takes off the anchor that you have to big cities and high rents and property values. And it really unlocks a lot of other things in society. So I think it sticks. And I think that it's going to have a sea change to everything that we do in our daily lifestyles.
So people move out, more people move out of the cities?
I think more people will move to suburbs. I think a smaller percentage will move out of even suburbs and go, in the great outdoors or move to another city altogether, right? The organizing principle for our lives, for most people on this planet, has been around where do they make their income and where can, then secondarily, where's the place that they want to live, right? So it's really driven by being able to put food on the table for families, and that's been the human existence, in the post-industrial era. And so, if we are now truly able to virtualize as a society, that really unlocks, hey, maybe I want to go live in my favorite city. Maybe I want to go live in my favorite state. Maybe I don't have to compromise on where my kids are schooled. Maybe I can be healthy and I can be close to family. So a lot of these things are opening up. The unfortunate part of this is that there's a sliding scale of opportunity and the ability to benefit from it based upon income. And so I think a great challenge will be for how tech companies and startups and entrepreneurs can find solutions which democratize access to all these new benefits that will happen as our society changes. And I hope that this is, COVID-19 in the year 2020, and that there will not be a COVID-20 or COVID-21, but that this will be truly an isolated incident and we'll learn from it. But I do think that the lasting effects of this will be strong and long lasting.
That's a perfect place to wrap. My guest today has been Steve Jang. If you're an entrepreneur, you'd be lucky to have him and Kanye on your cap table. We've done a number of projects with deals with them and look forward to doing more. Steve, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a great episode.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.